Hi, my name is Tara Nash, and today on this episode of the Conscious Grief series, I will be joined by Kim Houdebine. Kim is a double certified life coach, 2 times best-selling author, and now an expat that followed her dreams and moved to France. Kim works with amazing women to free themselves from relationship history, to create the beautiful, audacious life they crave, and the love and partnership they long for. This was a very heartfelt conversation with Kim. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did interviewing her. Kim, welcome to the Conscious Grief series 2. Thank you so very, very much for being here.
I'm delighted to be here. I was so excited when you asked me to join, and I feel really, really honored to have this opportunity to share this with you. You're such an amazing person. So thank you.
Well, I kind of realized that in the last series, we didn't go deep into relationship grief and divorce, whether it's a breakup or a divorce. And so when I met you, I thought, oh, this would be a really wonderful opportunity to go deeper into this subject and sort of uncover some of the maybe mysteries and misidentifications of grief. Like, so commonly we associate the word grief with somebody dying. And I have been in the process of a breakup for over a year now, and slowly moving into divorce, and it has been a lot. It's been a lot, and it still continues to be. And so, I just thinking a lot more about across the board, like in your experience as a relationship coach, do you think that people tend to their grief or have even a sort of awareness around that process when they break up with somebody?
I love this question. It's so perfect because in my experience, what I realized not too long ago was that 60% of my clients have either gone through a divorce or in the process or planning on a divorce. And we don't think of, you're right, we don't think of in a relationship when a relationship ends, especially if we are the ones making the decision, especially if we've concluded that this relationship is not the best relationship for us. We have this mindset of believing that, okay, we've made this decision, so once this happens, everything will be good. Like, that's a solution. And we fail to see that when we got into a relationship with someone, we had dreams, we had visions, we had images of what our future life was going to be like. And so even if we have decided that this person is not the one that needs to be in our life, we're going to grieve the loss of that dream. We're going to grieve the loss of that future. And so in answer to your question, do we tend to our grief? I believe that all the women I've ever worked with, my own personal experience, we tend to the grief that we acknowledge, and I know that was part of your question, or believe is okay. Like, it's okay for me to be sad that I'm going through this divorce, I'm losing this person, but we have kind of a cap on it. And in grief, in the breakup of a relationship, just like grief when you've lost someone to death, comes in waves. So it hits us unexpectedly. So I feel like we process it, and then we think we should be over it. We should be moving past it. We have a time frame on it. So I don't believe we fully give ourselves permission or the grace, actually, to give ourselves the time to grieve. And even if it's a year from now or 2 years from now, and you hear a song or you eat a familiar meal or you have a bottle of wine and suddenly you feel this twinge, what we tell ourselves is, no, that's not okay. That's in the past. I made this decision. My life is better now. And we start rationalizing it. And so I don't believe that we allow ourselves at that point to just sit with the grief and know that it's a part of us and that it will move on.
Yeah. And when you said just then, we can hear a song or something, and that actually happened to me on Sunday. I felt like I had been doing much better with my grief. And then the lyrics of a song and a few text messages backwards and forwards with my ex, and I just had a really big grief day, and it took me by surprise, because again, I had been feeling stronger, I guess, and I think that when this is sort of my own experience, because it has been so emotional, this breakup, and it was my choice. And so there have been moments where the grief has been so all-consuming, and that I still feel so much love for my ex. So it's made me really consider, did I try hard enough, and should I try again? And I think that is quite a common potential for a lot of people to go back and try again, because the sadness is so overwhelming.
Right, exactly. So we have these feelings, and it makes us question the decisions that we've made. Because why? Because it's very uncomfortable. And so it's sort of like the other things that we have a tendency to do in life, which is to try to, I don't want to say numb, but to try to dissuade those feelings, because the feelings are scary and they're very unpleasant. And so what I typically suggest to my clients is, when you're feeling that, is really spending some time with yourself and allowing the emotion to be there, even setting a clock. Because emotions, scientifically, it's been studied that emotions come in waves of like 90 seconds. And the perpetuation of the emotions will be based entirely on the thoughts that we continue to think. So when you're in that really poignant place of grief, and you shared your story with me, so I know deeply like what this cost you and what this took from your life. So when you're in that place of acute grieving, and you start to ask yourself the question, did I do the right thing? It's based entirely on a pain that you're feeling at that moment. And then that invites confusion and self-doubt and judgment. So an invitation I offer my clients is just to allow that to be there, and not second guess yourself, not judge what that emotion means, but just to experience that emotion and to ask yourself, what do I get to learn at this moment from how I'm feeling, so that you're open to possibilities. Because again, knowing your story and knowing the story of my clients and my own experience, because I was the one that divorced my ex-husband. And I can tell you, I had that same thought process. Did I do enough? Did I try hard enough? And the reality of the situation is, yes, I did. And I did everything that I knew at the time. And as we continue to learn and grow, we always know more. So we always go back. Well, if I knew that then, could I make it work now? But it's discounting all of the other rational decisions you made. And it's also, I heard this phrase, I think it's absolutely perfect, is when we're experiencing that deep grief, we have a tendency to mentally run the highlight reel of our relationship.
Yes.
We don't go back to the moments that created the decision for us to leave. We go back to like, oh my gosh, I remember this, and I remember this, and I remember this. And really, truly, that's the reason I say, if you offer yourself the opportunity to sit with the emotion and get realistic about the entire relationship.
And I think one of the things that has become clear for me is, like you were saying, the reasons that you chose to end the relationship in the first place. And it's been a real lesson in trusting myself.
Exactly.
Yeah, because again, when we have a breakup, you know, it's different to when somebody dies, because that's a finite situation which we don't have control over. When we have a breakup, we can gravitate towards the people that help us build up a case for why we left, and then we can also attract people who tell us why we could try again. And so we have a lot of different influences all the time. And that's a hard part of a relationship breakdown. And so what I realized after sort of giving it another go was that actually I can trust myself. I can trust my decisions.
Yes. Yeah. You put that so perfectly. And that is the key part. That is the part where when you're allowing yourself to feel your feelings without questioning what they are, without judging what they are, and just saying, okay, I'm experiencing this grief. I'm experiencing this sadness because I have this loss, and allowing that to be okay without going back to a place of questioning. So I love the fact that you brought this up, because that's one of the things that I usually suggest to clients when I'm working with them is be really careful who you share all of your personal relationship stories with. Because, like you just mentioned, everyone has their own filter, their own biases, their own opinions, and people will often tell us what we want to hear in an effort to make us feel better. Because our pain, and I know that you know this from the work that you do, when someone is grieving, it's uncomfortable for the other person. It's very challenging for a person just to sit with someone who is sad or grieving without wanting to fix it. So when we're struggling in our relationship, we may go to friends that say, oh yeah, you deserve better than that. Like, get out of there. We may go to friends then when we're in a different place, when we're really sad, it may go, oh, I remember how you guys did this. And so it always comes back to listening to our inner voice. And what's happened is that, especially in a relationship that hasn't worked out the way that we had hoped or anticipated, we start doubting that inner voice. Because it starts from a place of like, wow, if I made this decision and it's turned out this badly, can I really trust that voice? And the irony is that if we go back and truly pick apart the beginning of the relationship, we probably had red flags in the beginning of the relationship that we chose at that time not to pay attention to, because on the checklist, there was 80% that was good and there was 20% that, oh, he'll change, or I can live with this. So we've rationalized out of our own intuitive inner voice often when we entered a relationship. And so we do the very same thing instinctively after we've left it, or if we're thinking about leaving it. And it all comes back to the beautiful work that you do. And I'm so grateful for the work that you do. It all comes back to allowing those feelings to be okay. Just allowing it to be okay, and really practicing listening to our voice and asking ourselves, what does that mean? What does it mean? If I'm thinking about going back, what does that mean? Does that mean that I'm not trusting myself? Does that mean that someone said something? And really getting clear on that before we make any decisions, so that voice becomes so much louder than all the voices on the outside. Right. Because there'll always be voices on the outside.
And, if like I have to sort of go back and try again and just get the confirmation again, and that's okay too, isn't it?
Of course. Yes.
We don't all have straightforward breakups. In fact, they're never really straightforward, are they?
No, which is another reason when you have invited friends into your personal relationship, it can backfire. Because if you've built a case for why you should leave, and your friend has been, yeah, you should leave, and then you decide that you want to give it another go, then you have this other person in the middle of your relationship too. It's like, well, are you crazy? What's going on? So you continue to have that other voice. And the same thing happens in reverse. It also changes the relationship that our friends have with our partner. So they begin to see our partner in a different light, and they begin to have biases that they then bring back to us in conversation. So you really hit the nail on the head about it really comes back to being in a place of calm and peace, where you're willing, I guess, to pay the price. You're willing to listen to your voice, even if you don't know exactly what the outcome has been, even if that means you try again, and even if you get the same result, then to question that later is still okay. That's part of the grieving process to me, is to go, well, if I had, or what if I had, or I should have, or I could have. And that's really just all of that sadness swirling around in, I wanted this, I dreamed about this, I envisioned this. And it's just sadness. It's just a loss.
It so is. And you bring up something, for example, about the friends who can't cope with your pain. So the things that they say to us to get us out of that painful state.
Right.
And one of them is, I always remember a friend of mine saying this was her mother's mantra. Well, she'd say, you have to get under to get over. So as in get underneath another man to get over the one before, which I was like, just found so hilarious. But I think it is such a common way of moving on from a relationship, isn't it? To get on the dating sites and meet somebody else, because that is going to make us feel so much better.
Well, yeah. And that's why they call them rebound relationships, because that's exactly what we're doing. We are denying how we're feeling, or we're not wanting to feel how we're feeling. And so we're looking for validation that will somehow make us feel better. And, we all know inside, even if we don't say it verbally, that we can't placate or dismiss those feelings inside or get that validation from external sources. So yeah, so that's a beautiful point. And I know that we discussed this before. And I did this, so it's great. Like after my divorce, I waited 5 years. I dated other people. I was very conscious of all of the guidelines that they give you for after a breakup, especially after a long-term relationship. And that's not always the answer either, So it really comes back to that self-trust. I do recommend that you want to go out and date. Sure. I mean, I'll just be completely honest. If having sex is going to make you feel really, really good for a moment, and you understand that you're going to get up and walk away from that person, and this was just something like going and eating an ice cream sundae, cool, if that makes you feel better. But if getting under someone in an effort to get over someone, in my opinion, in my experience, never works, because then we even start that mental comparison. So when you enter into a relationship, you're bringing all of the things that you have not processed from your older relationship into your new one. And ironically, I've seen this happen over and over and over again, is that until we heal, until we process the things that we left behind and the reasons we left it behind, and we go through that process, regardless of who we get into a relationship with, how wonderful he is, how different he is, how amazing he is, a year down the road, what you're going to discover is that we managed to create exactly what we wanted to leave behind. We just packed it up and brought it with us into a new relationship.
Yeah, I know. It's a hard one, that, isn't it? Whether we know we've done our work or sufficiently or not, we'll soon find out in the next relationship.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And our work is always a progress. Like it's always a progress. What I've discovered is that when we bump up into things that trigger us, that are familiar to us, is once again stopping, it's pausing, it's taking the time to go, okay, what's underneath this? Like what's emotionally underneath this? Like, how am I doing this? Because that's been my experience too. Some of my clients I've had with me for a long time, because they went through a very messy divorce in the beginning of our working together. And they've taken like 2 years, really just not wanting to get involved in another relationship. And that's the question that they ask me all the time. Well, how do I know it's not going to happen again? And the way that you know it's not going to happen again is when you begin to trust yourself. And when things come up that are not acceptable or that feel familiar to you, you take the time for yourself and go, wait a minute, like what's going on here? Like, who am I being? How am I processing this? What am I needing from this relationship? And it's the difference in the way you handle it without going into that headspace of, oh my gosh, I didn't learn my lesson. I'm going to do it again. Because that's just another form of self beat up and judgment.
It is. And that client, would you mind, was she betrayed, or was there...
Yeah, she was. Yeah, I'm happy to share. She really did marry a clinically diagnosable narcissistic person, someone with narcissistic personality disorder who also had borderline antisocial behavior disorder. And when she first came to me, she was in tears saying, he wants a divorce and he's moved to the basement and I want to save my marriage. And after about 2 months of working with her, my question began to be like, why do you want to save your marriage? And it's a question that we don't really ask ourselves, which is another question about the relationship. So yeah, honestly, he's actually in jail right now. Like there were some serious things going on with him. And it took her about 6 months to actually see clearly beyond like the things that he had been telling her and the ways that he had manipulated her. And slowly, but little by little, different facts came to light. And she would share something that seemed normal for her because she'd been living for 14 years in this relationship. And I would ask her a question like, why is that okay? And remind me again, like, why is it that you want to maintain a marriage with someone who has done or said these things, who has not been trustworthy, who has, yes, cheated on you, who has stolen money from you? Like, what's the foundation of the relationship that you're trying to create? Mm-hmm. Because, from my perspective, these are big red flags to consider.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think she did keep choosing to want to be in a relationship?
It took her about 6 months because, I'm sure you're familiar. Like if you are truly, and I don't like the way that narcissism is bounced around today. It's almost like anytime you have an issue in a relationship, well, he's just a narcissist. And so I'm really reluctant to put labels on things because I think once we do that, we put people in a box. Mm-hmm. And we start looking for evidence to support our belief that he is X, Y, and Z. But it took her about 6 months to really uncover some of the things that he had so creatively deceived her about regarding finances, regarding his infidelity. So she really had to get to a place where these things were like non-deniable. Like they weren't suspicions. They weren't her being paranoid or emotional. They truly were like, no, this is your bank account and this is what's happening. And so it took that, I want to say stark realization, I guess, for her to get to that place. And then there was a grieving process where she was grieving, not only like the loss of what she had envisioned her future to be, but she was actually grieving like, oh my gosh, how could I be so gullible? How could I be so, which is another aspect we haven't even talked about, but it's like, how could I have fallen for this? How could I'm a smart woman. And she is, she has a master's degree. She's very successful, very accomplished. And I think that's even harder for intelligent women because, I'll put myself in it. We think we should know better. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was a process for her to actually come to the realization and to forgive herself. Mm-hmm. And it went through all the stages of grief. It went into denial, anger, all of the stages that you go through in the grieving process.
Yeah. And it really does amplify all of those. And I think, to be honest, for me, reaching the anger stage was a very helpful stage for me because I was having a really hard time letting go, and that propelled me into taking action and making things official. And I needed to
yes,
anger. It was really helpful for me. Yeah, man.
And it was the same thing for her. Absolutely. When she reached the anger phase, that's when it was like a switch and things got flipped and she had the courage and the strength. And for her at that point, then there was no going back. And which is, if you think about it, it's very logical because anger is a power emotion. So when we're angry, we have energy. Mm-hmm. When we're angry, we feel more in control. We feel more in charge. And it's like, I tell my clients, like anger and sadness are just two different sides of a coin. Mm-hmm. And so it's also a great thing to look at. Like if you find yourself constantly in a state of sadness, look underneath that because there's usually some anger for the way things are happening. And vice versa. If you're constantly angry with your partner or about what happened, there's usually some grieving that needs to be done.
That is really poignant. I really, really love that. Because sometimes I think to myself, for people who are, like you say, always angry in the breakup, at some point there was a lot of love there. And
exactly.
And when are you going to tap into the sadness of actually the love that was not forever lasting, and to really reach a more vulnerable place around it?
And some people never allow that. They never actually do allow that, which is, in my experience and from my perception, when the healing actually happens. I learned this at a young age. I get to give my mom credit for this because she divorced my dad when I was 3 years old. And as I was growing up, I would hear other friends' moms talk about their dads. And I was like, Mom, you never said anything negative about Dad. And she looked at me very matter-of-factly. She said, well, why would I? I chose to marry him. What does that say about me? And that's the part that sometimes I believe that women feel like they have to get angry in order to step back into their power, to actually move through, which is why I love the work that I do, because the basis of my work is to actually allow women to be beautiful and accomplished and soft and have emotions and know that they're powerful right where they are without having to muscle through. So that anger in those relationships is always a defense. It's always a fear, an unwillingness to look at like the participation in that, because it comes back to, well, what does that say about me?
Yeah. Yeah. And like the anger is helpful for getting to the separation, like you're saying. But it was interesting in a grief group that I did earlier this year or last year. Somebody came to do the group who wasn't specifically grieving anything in her life. She said that she wanted to do the group because she does hospice work. And so she felt that it would be helpful to do the course. And really, what ended up happening is she started to grieve a marriage that had ended 18 years ago, that she realized she'd never grieved because her children were young. She did move on quickly with somebody else. And she finally, now her children had grown up and were leaving home, and she finally had the space to feel the sadness. It was a really profound course for her. She felt a lot and she was really surprised.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm so moved by that. I read this really short 2-line poem once that stuck with me for years. And the line is, I sat with my anger long enough for her to tell me her name was grief.
Yes.
And sometimes it takes a while for us to see that. But there's always that part in there. And that, to me, that's the healing part. And yes, I agree. We have to get angry because that's the power emotion. That's what allows us to break out of whatever it is that we're getting to break out of, and to change that and to shift that. And then we get to come back to that place of understanding, even though we were angry, even though this happened, even though this person isn't the one, we get to be sad. We get to be sad that we love this person. Even if we chose to leave, we get to be sad that we're not going to have the future we dreamed about. We get to be sad all the things we talked about are not going to happen.
Yeah.
We get to experience that.
Yeah. And I think just dropping into the heart part of it, the sensitivity, and not becoming so, and this goes for the same in grief of a death too, that the most important part really of grieving is to keep our hearts open, to stay receptive to the energy of love, instead of putting all our barriers up and thinking, I can't do that again, I don't want to experience that pain again.
Yeah, there was a great speaker I heard again years ago, and he was talking about relationships. And he was saying, what happens if we go into a relationship and it doesn't work out? The next relationship we go into, we only go in halfway because we have the barriers up. And then the next relationship, a quarter of the way. And then actually, so till we get to the point where we're actually not going in at all, we're standing on the outside waiting on that person to come meet us, which of course never works out if we're, because they were not in the relationship. And I remember I laughed because he was like, I want to be devastated, because the whole concept was, I want to fully experience everything. If we don't allow ourselves to experience the fear, the grief, the sadness, we cannot experience the joy, the possibility, the hope, the wonder. So it's not like we can cut off some emotions and everything else and just have the good ones. They all get to be there in order for us to experience that. And I want every woman I know to experience like the absolute ultimate joy and connection and love.
I was thinking while you were talking that we're living in such different times now that we have, maybe like the lady that you were referring to earlier wanted to work on her marriage, and she wanted to stay in her marriage, because I think we hear so many messages how people don't work at things these days.
True.
And it's a really difficult sort of sweet spot where we say, okay, I think I've done everything I can do and I'm choosing, me, but then is that a very selfish place to be? And that's not, the way that you should be in a partnership. And what would you say to somebody who is in a relationship, but they are too afraid to leave, or they feel too guilty about leaving, and they think that they're selfish? And what advice would you give them?
That's a great question. And I usually always ask them, because that's very often the women that come to me that are in a relationship situation that's not working out. And the question that I ask them is very much the same thing that I ask my client, which is, why, take it off of him and put it on you, and ask yourself, why am I in this relationship? Like, what is my ultimate goal in this relationship? Is it selfish? Like, if you go back to the old expression, like you put your own oxygen mask on first, we literally cannot give to someone else what we're not giving to ourselves. And the reason for that question is that very often we enter into a relationship with the concept that that relationship is going to complete us. That's going to be the missing piece in our life. And it's not, it never is. So is it selfish to want to be a completely full, whole person, to enter into a relationship from a healthy perspective that is responsible for our own feelings, that is not looking for external validation to make it through? I mean, is that selfish? To me, that is like the epitome of selfless, because it means that if you're focusing on yourself and the things that aren't working for you, not just what you're going to get out of it, but why are you here? Like, why are you here? What is your vision in this relationship? What is your vision as a person in a relationship? So if guilt is entering into it, obviously that's beat up and self-judgment. And I would actually ask, like, what is the guilt about? Like, who is the guilt for? Like, is that because you need to be someone else, or because you can't justify leaving a long-term relationship? The truth is, you can want to get out of a relationship for no other reason than you want to get out of a relationship. And that comes back to giving yourself permission.
Right.
So condemnation and guilt for me is usually a lack of permission. And so I go to the core of, like, who are you being in this relationship? Is this the person that you are in your life or want to be in your life? And is it selfish to be that person?
And do you think, heartbreak and grief from a relationship, from speaking to you and learning about your work, it would be a real opportunity for growth? to really sit in that pain and work through it with somebody like yourself, somebody that's outside of your friendship, outside of your family, to have a support with somebody like yourself to really work into those feelings more and how to navigate through them.
Thank you so much for that. I think it's critical. Personally, I will always have a coach in my life because I tell people all the time, we don't see our blind spots. We don't see the reasons that we keep repeating things. We don't see why things aren't working out for us. And it's in leading back to the question you asked, if a woman has given everything that she can, we're giving it all from our evaluation of what we think we're supposed to be bringing. And who we think we're being and how we think we're showing up is not always the way that we're actually showing up. And I don't want to make this convoluted. My goal with every woman that I work with is for her to find her unique, beautiful, wonderful, amazing self. And I truly believe all women are, and to begin to trust her inner voice. And if she's repeating things over and over again, it means there's a piece that she's not able to see. So my goal as a coach is to sometimes show her things that she might not want to see and tell her things that she might not want to hear, because that's how she gets to be who she wants to be. And again, that's the reason I'll always have a coach, because I know I don't see the things that I can't see because of patterning and beliefs that I've had all my life that just seem like fact to me.
Yeah. Kim, you've answered everything so beautifully. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap up?
It's been such a delight to be here with you, and I have just so enjoyed this opportunity. And I guess if I were going to add one message, first, it would be enormous gratitude for you and to you for being who you are and doing the work that you do and being so honest and vulnerable and sharing with your audience and with the rest of the world, like what is possible, and allowing them to do that and grieve through the process, which is huge. For me, it would just be an encouragement. Like whether it's me, I'm not attached to being the relationship coach for every woman, but if you're struggling in a relationship, I would just encourage you to seek out a coach, seek out professional guidance that is objective, that will tell you the truth, that will give you feedback that allows you to grow. Like, I think that's critical for all of us.
Yeah. And I would end that by saying, I think that's a very conscious way of grieving a relationship, to do it with intention and do it with guidance of somebody who can walk with you, companion you, coach you.
Yeah. Yes. Beautiful. Thank you. You said it perfectly.
Thank you so very, very much, Kim. I so appreciate you and everything that you've shared with us. And to everybody that's watching, thank you very much. And
yes, thank you for being here. Yes, bye.